pressed play.
Please don't throw up either. Okay. Today I'm going to be giving you a short presentation on guided reading and diagnosing weaknesses in students with guided reading and grouping students for success while making guided reading groups. So just to start today, I want to do a little icebreaker game, and the game's going to be called One Word. I'm going to give you a category, and I want you to just think of the first word that comes to your head about that category. So first is dessert. What comes to your head first when you think of dessert? Fattening. Chocolate.
Chocolate. What comes to your head? I thought of ice cream. What comes to your head when you think of football?
Eagles. Sports.
Sports. What comes to your head when you think of school? One word.
Books. Job.
Books. Job. Yeah, that's a good one too. What comes to your head when you think of guided reading?
Groups.
Groups.
Levels.
Yeah, definitely. And those are two very big parts of guided reading, which are actually two of the big things we're going to be talking about today. So we know as we're starting to start school this year that we're all going to be using the Fontes and Pinnell benchmarking system to benchmark our students to figure out what level they're reading at. So beginning of the year, we do this with all of our students, and we'll be continuing to do it a couple times throughout the year. And we group our students according to level. Oh, this student's reading a level N, this student's reading a level O, and we group our students according to those levels. But what happens when you benchmark a student, you read with a student, and you figure out, oh, well, this student's reading on grade level, but they're really, really struggling with comprehension. They don't really understand what they read, even though that they can read it. What happens then? Because then they're reading at different levels. So this kind of raises the question of, is leveled grouping always appropriate? Is it always appropriate to group students according to level? Or maybe this brings up the idea that it is more appropriate to group our students according to skill, where they're struggling. And this is the conversation that we're going to have today, is how can be so much more beneficial to group our students according to where they're struggling, instead of, oh, well, this student's just reading on this level, so I'm just going to throw them in a group with other students at that level, which I'm sure is something that you can see in your classrooms as well. Right, Charlotte? So, diagnosing reading weaknesses. When we read with our students, especially in the beginning of the year, we try to find out and kind of diagnose our students with areas where they might be struggling. They might be struggling with comprehending. Maybe they can read, but they can't comprehend what they're reading. Maybe they have trouble sounding out new words. Maybe they have trouble decoding. Not all students fit into the same cookie cutout as a reader. So us as teachers, and we have to stop and we need to think, well, where do we need to help our students? We need to help our students and strengthen these areas where they are struggling. So why is this important? In our district, I've had the opportunity to talk to some administrators within our building, within the district and township in general, and all of these administrators have kind of said that guided reading is definitely an area where teachers could benefit from some more professional development opportunities on, to really focus on how we group our students with guided reading, which is why I'm making this presentation today. So not just diagnosing students with areas where they may be struggling, but also thinking about how we can group these students, like we mentioned before. Students are more likely to be successful as readers if we focus on grouping them according to skills and not levels. There is actually a lot of research, which we've all talked about in professional development before, research that kind of supports this idea. There's been a couple studies done by the International Reading Association that come out and say that it's important to group students by skill instead of level, and also a really good study done by the Literacy Research Instruction Journal that focused on different techniques for grouping students. So right now, I just want you to kind of turn and talk to each other just for a little bit about how you think we can group our students. How do you think we know that we group our students in our classrooms, but what skills do we think that we can group our students by? So just kind of talk amongst yourselves for a minute. How do you think you can do that? I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Talk about, we always group our students by.
Need more help.
Yeah, with
And
comprehension
understand.
and yeah. We always have students that can't decode, have trouble just reading the words in general.
I feel like you can tell right away too.
Oh yeah,
Well,
definitely.
ones might need the little extra help and ones that don't.
Yeah,
And then you finagle around.
yeah,
You figure it out.
definitely,
People and stuff.
definitely. So grouping students by need. We can group our students specifically by where they're struggling. And some of the areas that we find most in our classrooms, which I'm sure you can say that you can see as well, are comprehension, decoding, analyzing, being able to figure out why something's happening in a story, fluency, accuracy, and inferencing. Kind of inferencing, figuring out that, oh, well, like, why do you think that happened? Or what clues helped me figure out why that happened? Some of those skills are easier to group in higher grades or lower grades, depending. As you get to higher grades, you're not going to see many decoding issues because kids can already sound out words pretty well. You might see that more in lower grades. The big thing to really think about when grouping for guided reading is that groups can always change. We know that by now as teachers that you're not always going to have the same guided reading groups the whole year. They might change. The student might get better in comprehension and then maybe move to a higher group. And everything can always change, especially when we group our reading groups. So, working in guided reading groups. So when we pull our guided reading groups, and when I keep saying, oh, we're going to pull our guided reading groups by skill. So what does that mean? So if we have a group in comprehension, students might want to work on like reading a story and figuring out, oh, who are the important characters? What are they doing? Where is the story taking place? They might want to use sticky notes to help them take notes. Sticky notes are the best. They might want to use that strategy that we just used, turn and talk to a partner about what you just read. If students are struggling with decoding, they might want to chunk out the sounds of a word or figure out like different taught skills that we can use to sound out words. If analyzing, in groups where we're working on analyzing, thinking aloud is always a really good strategy. It's always something we model to our kids too, like thinking aloud, or why something happened, how something happened. Fluency is very important as well. Sometimes students are struggling with that. It is really important to model, to have repeated readings where students are reading the same text over and over.
Repetition.
Yeah, repetition, definitely. Or recording. For fluency and accuracy, it's really important for students to record themselves, hear it back, or watch themselves back, which is definitely a big important thing for students in any grade. And also when we're talking about inferencing, kind of figuring out what clues help me answer or support my opinion. You would agree too? Yeah. So, we've been talking this whole time about grouping students by weaknesses, but what happens when you have a student that's really, really strong, really doesn't have many reading weaknesses? We also can group our students to enrich them, to enrich their learning and their education. Students reading above grade level can be grouped by areas of strength instead of areas of weaknesses in order to enrich and challenge them as readers and just motivate them as readers. These groups can focus on like special vocabulary words or increasing vocabulary, inferencing skills, or maybe even reading certain genres, reading some more mysteries or reading some more nonfiction or a series of books. It's just really important to enrich their reading experience as well and not just focus on the students that are struggling. As teachers, we have to have a nice balance of working with students that are struggling, but also enriching those students that are at a higher level. Yeah. So right now I kind of want you just to think about for a minute. I want you to just reflect. We don't even really need to talk about it. If you want to jot down a note or something, kind of reflect on what you've done in the past in reading and guided reading for enriching students who are reading on a higher level, and maybe just think about maybe some ways that, you know, going forward that we can use them. And I kind of just wanted to have a minute to just kind of think about it and just kind of reflect on what you've done. And maybe how we could enrich our students. I know this year I want to try to use some different genres in my classroom, some more historical fiction and biographies with some of my higher students, so maybe that's something you can try to do as well. So I want to end today with takeaways. What can I do now? We've talked about some things, we've talked about grouping our students. What can we do now? I don't want you to just sit here and be like, oh, I just heard this presentation and not do anything with it. So what can you take away from today's session is really just thinking about as you're going and starting the school year, this year, and you're reading with your students, figuring out the areas where maybe they're struggling instead of just saying, oh, I benchmarked them, they're at a level N, I'm just going to throw them in a group with all the level N's, instead of figuring out, oh, well, this level N is struggling with this and this level N is struggling with this, maybe I can put those struggling students together. And how can this be used in our classrooms? This is ultimately going to benefit our students really a lot, to really group our students differently according to if they're struggling with accuracy or literacy or comprehension, and breaking them apart like that is really just going to help them in the end while we're doing guided reading. Any questions or comments or anything? I mean, could you see this as something you could use in your classroom?
Yep, absolutely.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let me just close this up. You were a good girl.
She hung in there, didn't
I
she?
know.
You did good. Bye.